Hello and welcome back. You're watching Parry This. Today our topic is the popes of the Western Schism and a broad overview of the Western Schism as a whole. So without any further ado, let's dive on in and learn about those popes. So what was the Western Schism? Also known as the Papal Schism or the Great Western Schism. Well, in simple terms, this refers to the period from 1378 to 1417, when two or at times even three claimants to the papacy existed. This meant that different groups within the Roman Catholic Church were putting forth their own pope that they insisted was the one legitimate one. This in turn deeply divided all of Europe into different camps, with some following the pope in Rome and others following the pope in Avignon. The origins of the Western Schism go all the way back to 1309, where the so-called Babylonian captivity started. Basically, this period of time is where the central seat of the papacy was in France, and was essentially controlled by the French monarchy, being little more than puppets for the French state. If you have watched the show Nightfall on Netflix, this period sort of starts in Season 2. In that show, they depict it as though the French had the Pope murdered and replaced, but most historians agree his humiliation at the hands of King Philip and his death were likely unrelated. It was for this time that the papacy was moved and stayed in the French city of Avignon. However, in any case, this period went from 1309 until 1377, when it finally ended, and the Pope returned to Rome. This Pope was Pope Gregory XI. However, when he did finally return, he found the city of Rome to be wholly in trouble, with great turbulence and civil unrest. So, Pope Gregory XI decided to make an Irish goodbye and get back to Avignon. However, he died on March 27, 1378. When 16 cardinals convened on April 7th to elect a new pope, the Roman populace loudly demanded the election of a Roman, or at least an Italian, and this is where the problems begin. The next day, the Council of Cardinals elected Bartolomeo Prignano, who was the Archbishop of Parry, and was well known for his piety and for being a learned man. Before he could be warned, an angry Italian mob broke into the Vatican palace to wreck up the place, before knowing that an Italian had been elected, and the cardinals fled. It wasn't until April 9th, 1378 that the cardinals reconvened and informed Bartolomeo that he had been chosen. He took the name Urban VI and would reign as the Pope in Rome from 1378 to 1389. However, he would be the start of the Great Schism. For 5 months after the election, the cardinals acknowledged Urban VI, but they gradually began to have misgivings. Displaying a lack of tact and moderation, Urban declared his intention of reforming the church and condemned the cardinals for their luxury and idleness. They therefore turned against him, and on one pretext or another abandoned Rome. At Avignon on August 2nd, the dissidents published a manifesto in which they pronounced his election null and void, on the ground that pressure from the Romans had made a free election impossible. Denouncing Urban as a usurper, they elected a rival pontiff, Cardinal Robert of Geneva, on September 20th, and he took the name Clement VII. This led to the divisions across Europe, with each monarch deciding which pope they believed was the one true pope. Western European rulers were forced to declare themselves for the Roman or the Avignon pope. France was the staunchest supporter of Avignon, and was followed by Castile, Aragon, Scotland, and Savoy. In contrast, England, Portugal, Hungary, the Scandinavian states, and the Holy Roman Empire supported Rome. It should be understood that while these decisions were made at the high level, usually just the individual monarchies, the devout among each populace, for the most part, fell in line and followed their king's lead. For example, Saint Vincent Ferrer and Saint Colette favored Avignon, while Saint Catherine of Siena and Saint Catherine of Sweden favored Rome. So we have round one of the Papal Schism established. On one side we have Pope Urban VI representing Rome. He is supported by England, Portugal, Hungary, and the Scandinavian states, and the Holy Roman Empire. And on the other side we have Pope Clement VII in Avignon, and he was supported by France, Castile, Aragon, Scotland, and Savoy. Thus, the church was divided in its allegiance to these two men, who promptly excommunicated one another. Unable to drive Urban from Rome, Clement established himself at Avignon in June of 1379. Are you with me so far? Because it only gets better from here. Round 2 starts in 1389 when Pope Urban VI died. The schism could have potentially ended here. All that would have needed to happen for the schism to end here would have been for the Roman cardinals to concede and accept Pope Clement VII, the current anti-pope in Avignon, as the one true pope. The church could have been reunified here. However, the Roman cardinals wanted none of that. For reference sake, at this point, Rome was pushing for the divestment of church and state, and for church officials to be less involved in politics of state and to live more modestly. whereas the Avignon Papacy was more of an institution organization, and they were trying to protect the riches and lavish lifestyle that high-ranking officials had become accustomed to. After all, that is the whole reason they elected an antipope in the first place. In any case, the Roman cardinals elected their next pope, who would take the name Boniface IX. Pope Boniface IX would be the Roman pope from 1389 till 1404. On the other hand, over on the Avignon side, when antipope Clement VII died in 1394, the Avignon cardinals elected Benedict XIII to be the new antipope in Avignon. Benedict XIII would remain antipope from 1394 until dying in 1423. However, the story is complicated, so we'll get into that a little bit later. As a solution, the University of Paris proposed the resignation of the two pontiffs, arbitration by judges selected by them, or the summoning of a general council. When Boniface IX died, the Roman cardinals elected Innocent VII, who reigned from 1404 until 1406, and after his brief reign, Gregory XII reigned from 1406 to 1415. Both of whom pledged to work for a union. In 1407, the Roman and Avignon popes agreed to resign simultaneously. However, neither man trusted the other, and they did not carry out the pact. So, since things have remained relatively straightforward until this point, I will now muddy the waters a bit by talking about the Pisan line, or Pisan line. So, this is where that elusive third papal claimant comes in. When Gregory XII created 4 new cardinals, including 2 of his nephews, contrary to the promises he made at his election, his other cardinals withdrew their obedience. The cardinals at Avignon also abandoned Benedict XIII. 13 cardinals from both sides agreed to summon a general council to settle the schism. This assembly met at Pisa on March 28, 1409. The rival pontiffs refused to attend and tried to counteract it by calling councils of their own. About 500 prelates attended the Council of Pisa. The council declared that it represented the whole church and that the cardinals had had the power to convoke it. When the 2 popes refused to answer a summons to appear, the council deposed them both on June 5, 1409. The cardinals then elected Alexander V, who reigned from 1409 to 1410. Although most of Europe recognized him, his election did not put an end to the schism, because neither the Roman nor the Avignon pope would abdicate. Thus, there were 3 claimants to the papacy. So at this point, it should be clear that things were not being handled very well internally in the church, and it was actually causing some problems. Since many high-ranking church officials were deeply entrenched in politics and secular power, it caused a great deal of strife throughout Europe. Certainly between countries like France and England, and this would in fact play a large part in the 100 Years' War. But even more so in the Holy Roman Empire, which would see one country supporting one papal claimant and another being loyal to a separate claimant. And with tensions rising from Jan Hus and his followers, things needed to be settled quickly so that the church could be reunified. Or at least, this is the thinking of the current power man in the region, Sigismund of Luxembourg, who had become the Holy Roman Emperor in 1410. If you would like to learn more about him, I have a whole video covering that specific topic, and also one that dives into the heretic Jan Hus, so I invite you to check them both out, as they relate to this topic heavily. In any case, it is here where Sigismund takes things into his own hands, and where the Council of Constance comes into play. So, for many reasons, both spiritual and political, Emperor Sigismund convinced the current Pisan claimant, John XXIII, to call a general council to meet at Constance. The objectives of the council were to heal the schism, to reform the church, and to suppress heresy. In addition to the Pisan Pope and the Emperor, envoys from many secular rulers and about 600 bishops, theologians, and canon lawyers attended. The council started on November 5, 1414, and it was decided that each of the attending guest nations would get one vote, so that includes the English, French, Italians, Germans, and the Spanish. Realizing that the council did not intend to confirm him, John XXIII fled from Constance in March of 1415, hoping the assembly would dissolve. Sigismund intervened and persuaded the prelates to remain. Then, on April 6th, the council enacted the decree Sacrosancta, declaring that the council represented the universal church and that all Christians, including the Pope, were subject to it. On May 29th, the council deposed John XXIII, and on July 4th, Gregory XII, after convoking the council, abdicated. The Avignon antipope Benedict XIII refused to submit, and he was deposed on July 26, 1417. Having now cleared the church of papal claimants, the council, which consisted of 23 cardinals, and 6 delegates from each of the 5 nations were set to elect the new pope. On November 11, 1417, Cardinal Odo Colonna was elected as the almost universally recognized one true pope. He took the name Martin V, and he would reign from 1417 until 1431. And after him, the papal line remained stable and essentially unbroken up until modern day 2019. So, at this time, the Papal Schism, also known as the Great Western Schism, officially ended. On a note, back to an earlier topic, the last anti-pope from Avignon stubbornly refused to abide by the rulings made here, and actually continued calling himself the pope until the day he died in 1423 at Peniscola in his native kingdom of Aragon. His remaining cardinals elected another anti-pope, who would take the name Clement VIII, but he would submit to Rome and recognize Martin V only 6 years later, thus ending the last remaining piece of the schism once and for all in 1429. After everything was all said and done, the schism was resolved and the church was reunified, but the damage had already been done. The schism did untold harm to the papal prestige and intensified the growth of hostility to the papacy in many parts of Europe. The failure of papal leadership encouraged the development to the conciliar theory, which proposed that the General Council, representing the whole body of Christians, was the highest governing agency in the Church, superior even to the Pope. The upheaval occasioned by the schism led directly to the Protestant Reformation, and in summary, the destruction of a unified Christendom for the foreseeable future. So, just to touch back on the key points covered in this video. From 1309 to 1377, the seat of the papacy resided in Avignon, France, rather than Rome. Gregory XI returned to Rome in 1377, thus ending the Avignon papacy, at which point the Romans rioted to ensure the election of a Roman for pope. Urban VI, born Bartolomeo Prignano, the Archbishop of Parry, was elected in 1378. As pope, Urban VI proved suspicious, reformist, and prone to violent outbursts of temper, and thus many of the cardinals who had elected him soon regretted their decision and moved to Avignon, where they elected Robert of Geneva as a rival pope on September 20th of the same year. The second election threw the church into turmoil, and it quickly escalated from a church problem to a diplomatic crisis that divided Europe. The conflict was finally resolved by a council, which was convened by the third Pisan Pope, John XXIII, and the Holy Roman Emperor, Sigismund of Luxembourg, in 1414, which resulted in the excommunication of some of the claimants to the papacy. This schism and the resulting changes in the church, as well as some of the things that happened at the Council of Constance, led directly, in one way or another, to the Protestant Reformation. So that does it for this video. Hopefully I was able to make this topic, which can be very complicated, a little simpler. I hope this video was both entertaining and informative, but in any case, thank you everyone for watching, and have a nice day. I'll see you next time. Thanks.